Genshin Impact's version 4.6 drops in just a few days, and I know we're all waiting with bated breath to know the truth of Arlecchino's past, where she came from, if she's a hilichurl, if she's a descender, and everything else that could possibly constitute why she remembers Scaramouche. But Arlecchino's complexity exceeds just her history. It's no surprise that Genshin loves its references, whether it be to Star Wars, the Vedic texts, or Shakespeare, but especially Orphism, and especially Wagner. If you're not familiar with him, Richard Wagner was a 19th century composer known for his scores such as The Ride of the Valkyries and his operas such as Parsifal, which I covered in my video on the Schwanenritter, and the renowned Der Ring des Nibelungen, the Ring of Nibelung. Someone else adores Wagner though, even more than Genshin does. That someone was Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, I love Nietzsche almost as much as Nietzsche loves Wagner, so of course I was elated when I found references to Nietzsche scattered throughout Genshin. But never did I think one of his works would actually be canonized within Genshin Impact. But it is, in Arlecchino. Call me Kaeros, and together let us study the worldview of our beloved knave as it is told to us by Nietzsche in his first and second treatises on the genealogy of morality. This all started out as a few interesting connections for me until I saw a name that caught my eye, and then everything immediately fell into place. That name was Tartuffe, which is the name of the man Arlecchino, deals with in her character teaser. The name Tartuffe is a reference to a play by Molière of the same name. It tells the story of a devious and fraudulent man, the titular Tartuffe. Surprise, I haven't actually read Tartuffe. I will. Soon. I'm a little busy right now. The reason the name caught my eye was because Nietzsche mentions it in his second treatise. He uses quote-unquote Tartuffery here to define actions similar to those of Molière's leading role. I thought it was a silly little name and linked it instead to the Italian dessert tartufo. But then I watched Arlecchino's character teaser, thought to myself, wow, didn't I just read that name in the second treatise? What a coincidence! Made the connection, did some philosophizing and theorizing, and here we are. A brief disclaimer, I'm not going to use this video just to regurgitate Nietzsche, or end up introducing Schopenhauer or something and talking about will and rationale and not Genshin. This is a Genshin video, about Genshin, but through the lens of Nietzsche, so we do have to understand his philosophy. So, I guess, more essay, less video. That being said, I am but a student of Haravatat, so please feel free to discuss anything in the comments which I may have missed. D'accord? Super. To first understand Nietzsche's second treatise, we need a little background on his first treatise, titled Good and Evil, Good and Bad, wherein he examines the nature of good, bad, and evil. Pretty self-explanatory. His main premise here is that those in power have designed the stipulations for society not to benefit citizens, but to benefit themselves. Therefore, everything done is done for the aristocracy, the nobles, the rich, and every action is defined as good, bad, or evil, according with the mentality of those in power. In Nietzsche's own words, now, in the first place, it is obvious to me that the actual genesis of the concept good is sought and fixed in the wrong place by this theory. The judgment good does not stem from those to whom goodness is rendered. Rather, it was the good themselves, that is, the noble, powerful, high-ranking, and high-minded, who felt and ranked themselves and their doings as good, which is to say, as of the first rank, in contrast to everything base, low-minded, common, and vulgar. Wealth is good, and poverty is bad. The impoverished overwhelm the wealthy in terms of numbers, yet they must suffer while the rich abide by their own schedules. From this, Nietzsche introduces the ideas of master morality and slave morality, which in and of themselves are pretty self-explanatory. But I want to emphasize one key thing about his slave morality. To those who have studied revolutionary theory or read texts on the matter, this idea will be no foreign concept, and it likely won't be even if you haven't. Those in a state of slave morality have a sense of physicality about them. Oppression has driven them to revolt, not just mentally, but physically. It is a byproduct of being displaced from one's home, family, country, and everything they hold dear by an outside commanding force. To Nietzsche, The word that best represents slave morality is ressentiment, or resentment in English. Knowing this, we can now move into the second treatise, titled Guilt, Bad Conscience, and Related Matters. It is here that Nietzsche establishes his belief that humanity has an inherent nature of debtor and creditor. One is always in a state of owing to another. This is not because humanity has been founded upon transactions, from the earliest trade of tools and food to university loans and mortgage, but because we are always responsible. Nietzsche dubs responsibility a privilege because we, as humans, are capable of lasting achievements on both the grandest and most minute of scales. But regardless, we have adopted responsibility not as a privilege, but as an everyday pledge. Perhaps Nietzsche says it best when he states that the proud knowledge of the extraordinary privilege of responsibility, the consciousness of this rare freedom, this power over oneself and fate, has sunk into his lowest depth and has become instinct. The dominant instinct. What will he call it? This dominant instinct, assuming that he feels the need to have a word for it? But there is no doubt. This sovereign human being calls it his conscience. With quote-unquote man designating himself as the being who measures values, who values and measures, we have entered into a state of not just contractual law, but also relentless guilt and personal obligation. If we have acted unjustly, we must right it. If we owe money, we must repay it. If we have sinned, we must atone. All of this feeds into the notion Nietzsche establishes that humanity feeds off of cruelty and punishment, even if such punishment is, as it has evolved to be, imaginative and inward. How do we grapple with this, though? Well, so that concealed, undiscovered, unwitnessed suffering could be banished from the world and honestly negated, one was almost compelled back then to invent gods and intermediate beings of all heights and depths. In short, something that also roams in secret, that also sees in the dark, and that does not easily let an interesting, painful spectacle escape it. This introduces the idea of deities invented as explanations of sin. Yet so too do we turn to deities to absolve ourselves of sin, because, in many popular faiths, we are promised something glorious upon death if we repent for our cruelties. Debtor and creditor, God and man. What Nietzsche proposes, though, instead, is that we rid ourselves of this contractual relationship and instead operate for man, for we have grown ashamed of ourselves due to our actions. If, instead of binding ourselves to a contractual relationship, we operate for our own needs and desires, then we shall transgress such bonds and operate not for a deity or higher power, but for ourselves and what is present. Sound familiar? I should hope so. The story of the House of the Hearth is Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, but Nietzscheified. On the one hand, we have Crucibena, the previous knave, and on the other, we have Arlecchino, her successor and critic. Crucibena founded her philosophy for the House of the Hearth on succession and greed. The story she reads to the children at the beginning of Arlecchino's animation is not meant to induce any idea of equality, but rather power and corruption. Defeating your competitors to ascend the throne is a wonderful opportunity, according to Crucibena. She does not inform any of the eager ears at her disposal of the cruelty and devastation which will bloom in one's soul, and the isolation which will emerge as a result. Crucibena represents master morality. She crafts the rules according to her standards so that she reaps the rewards, not the children. She inspires action for individual, personal gain. There is no unanimous heart that unites the house under one roof. She is a creditor, and those she adopts are inescapably in her debt, not just for their lives, but for the success that shall be awarded to them should they rise to her position. Arlecchino, alternatively, as I'm sure you can already expect, represents slave morality and the notion of ressentiment. She despises Crucibena and what she represents. Her upset and rage after Clervie's death can no longer repress the physicality of violence which those of a slave morality possess. Arlecchino stands unwavering in the face of oppression. Her will is not just for herself, but for every other child of the House of the Hearth, past, present, and future. Under her wing, all of her children have equal opportunity. There is no cornucopia awaiting them upon their ascent to the status of father, and there is no pressure to attain such a status either. With such an alignment of morals, everyone operates for themselves, even though they work under Father's orders, because there is no obvious reason to disavow her reign. Success is not flaunted as something for an individual to attain, but for everyone to attain. And we see this most clearly in the version 4.6 trailer, when all Linny, Lynette, and Freminet want is to be a family with Father always at the helm. Nothing more, nothing less. But here's the rub, as I'm sure you're all eager to point out the fact that Arlecchino, too, in a fashion not too dissimilar from Crusobena, forces her children to fight for the title of father. However, she does not ask them to fight each other, but rather herself. Here we must return to the idea of debtor and creditor once again, because it is Arlecchino and no other member of the house who is under a debt. That debt is her blood debt, that which she shall repay upon her defeat at the hands of, in her idealization, Linny. Linny does not owe anyone anything. He operates for Arlecchino, yes, but because she is his family, as are Lynette, Freminet, and the other children. Never does he operate for himself. We see this most evidently when Gheisli takes Lynette during the Fontaine Archon quest, which causes Linny to erupt because, more than anything, he wants his family to be safe. In Linny, it becomes clear that even though Arlecchino does make the rules as the head of the house, she inspires in all her children a stable sense of unity and empowerment. They can achieve all that they wish, save those they wish to save, and this is instilled in them not solely by instinct, but because this is what their father strives to do. There is no greed, no sense of competition or entitlement. This is, as Nietzsche proposes, man for man's sake. Oh, yes, about the Tsaritsa. I knew you were going to ask. The Tsaritsa is an interesting case, because it could certainly be said that, as a Fatui harbinger, Arlecchino does not, in truth, work for humanity, but for a deity, and in that case goes against Nietzsche's philosophy. However, such is not the case. The Tsaritsa operates for her own ambitions, and those ambitions are not for the heavenly principles, but for the world itself. If Tevat is the source of all sin, she shall root it out. If sin instead is sourced by the heavens, she shall defy even the primordial one. Therefore, when it comes to the situation of Snezhnaya, the reigning deity must not be thought of as the Tsaritsa, but rather the heavenly principles, for the Cryo-Archon does not ask her people to worship, only to act. It is my hope that we shall be given a glimpse further into the shadowed secrecy of the Tsaritsa in Arlecchino's story quest, for I find her nuance to be truly fascinating. As always, thank you so much for listening, and you can call me Kaeros.